Hey everyone, happy Friday. Although, well,
Not that it's a very happy Friday for long.
I was just
Some
about
of
to say
us
the only thing I have at the top is
poring over emails.
the only thing I have at the top. Thank you, Matt, for the cue there. Today at approximately 6 p.m., the department plans to produce approximately 1,500 additional pages of former Secretary Clinton's emails. As you know, we received instructions to produce emails, from the court to produce emails on February 13th and 19th, which we did, as well as to provide an additional interim production today before completing the entire production by February 29th. And we take our obligations to the court seriously and are making every effort to comply with this order. We do intend in that spirit to make a final production on Monday, February 29th. That's all I have at the top.
How about an email question? Do you have an assessment at this point how many of the documents contain classified information?
I would say at this point we're not aware that any, I don't have an assessment of how many contain classified information at this point. I can say that we're not aware that any additional documents in this tranche will be upgraded to top secret.
I have an additional question on that. Isn't it true that there are more emails that will be withheld in full?
In tonight's?
No, by the end of the process on the 29th.
Let's let the process finish. We're still reviewing some of these emails, a lot of them, frankly, going to be working hard through the weekend. So I don't want to preview what may or may not happen on the final release on Monday.
But you're aware that there are some in a pool that may be withheld in full?
Some in a pool? I'm not aware
There's
of that.
a group.
I'm not aware of
At
that.
least two.
Again, I'm not aware. I'm aware that there are, in fact, still conversations taking place between the various parts of the interagency talking about some of the emails. Those are ongoing, but we hope to resolve them by Monday.
I just have a final one on that.
Sure.
Mrs. Clinton is referring to the FBI investigation as a security inquiry or a security review. Is that also the language of the State Department?
I would not attempt to characterize what the FBI investigation is or isn't. I've referred to them. Thanks.
Mark,
Yeah.
realizing that you guys don't like to get involved in any kind of politics, I have to ask this question anyway because it directly relates to the secretary and to the building, about last night's debate in which the three leading candidates each kind of took turns taking shots at the secretary, and one of them said that John Kerry has been the most anti-Israel Secretary of State this country has ever seen. What does he make of that kind of language, and what do you, what does the building think about that?
Honestly, I haven't had a chance to talk to the secretary about those comments. I'm sure he would disagree. And certainly, in all seriousness, we would profoundly disagree with that kind of assessment. I just would say Secretary Kerry has a proud record of over 3 decades of steadfast support for Israel's security and well-being, including staunch opposition to boycotts. We think his record speaks for itself.
Okay. And then just one other thing, and I don't expect you to know the answer to this off the top of your head because it goes kind of back, goes back a while, but if you could look into it.
Okay.
The same person who said that also said that last year when the FAA briefly banned flights, U.S. airlines, from flying into Tel Aviv because of the shelling that was going on.
Right.
He said at the time, this candidate said that it was an economic boycott of Israel. He called for the secretary to resign, I think, and then former Michael Bloomberg went on a commercial flight to Tel Aviv. And then he said, together, the heat and the light that was put on the State Department was so great that within 36 hours they lifted the ban on air flights into Israel. Did the State Department have any role at all in the FAA's decision to either put the ban in place in the first place or remove it later?
Yeah, I would want to really look at that for precisely, I think, the reasons you posed the question. Certainly given the security situation at the time, part of our normal role is to obviously caution American citizens traveling abroad anywhere.
Specifically talking about the
No,
FAA.
I agree with it. So, but just to
flight
finish
ban.
on that, I
So-
don't know that we would have
Okay.
any
Well, I know,
direct
but
involvement in that.
could you
So I'll
check?
check. Yep,
Thanks.
takes a question.
Can we go to Syria? Can we go to Syria?
Just
Oh, Israel-Palestine, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
thanks.
A couple of issues.
Of course,
outstanding. On Wednesday, the secretary said that basically the French proposal is driven by, the international community being really frustrated with the deadlock peace process. Is that the feeling, or does that mean that you guys might be inclined at one point or another in the future to go ahead and support such an effort in the face of such a deadlock?
I'm sorry, you said
that-
precisely, you said the secretary.
The secretary said that the French proposal,
Right.
which I asked you about last week,
Yeah.
was largely driven by frustration, a frustrated international community. So does that mean in any way that you are walking away from, let's say, insisting on direct one-on-one negotiation and perhaps supporting at one point, because of the deadlock, supporting such an effort?
No, look, I would say that, as I think I answered you last week, we're going to continue to engage our partners with the hope of finding a constructive way forward in advancing what's a shared goal of a two-state solution. And, there have been considerable challenges, as we talked a lot about over the various months, to overcome. And frankly, right now, given some of the tensions and the need for de-escalation in order to get to a point where we can even start a process, a legitimate process towards a two-state solution. Again, start a legitimate process towards a two-state solution. It's always a priority. It's always a priority for this administration. It's always a priority for this secretary.
Sorry, just bear with
Yeah,
me.
go
I have a
ahead.
couple more questions
Yeah, sure.
on this issue. Also, the secretary said that although that you guys received a copy of the proposal, he had not been able to look at the details. Does that still remain the case? He said that he did not look at it. He's still looking at some details and so on. Although I think you said that you guys looked at all the details last week.
Well, we are aware, obviously, of the French proposal. We're talking about it. We're looking at it, studying it. And we look forward to engaging them further on some of the ideas that it presents. But as I said, our focus is on, ultimately is on a process towards a two-state solution. And how do you get there? How do you get to the point where you can restart that process?
And today, the former envoy, Dennis Ross, and former aide to Martin Indyk, in the negotiations, wrote an article where they really are calling on you guys to restart the process, but without insisting on stopping the settlements, basically. That leave those blocks. Has there been any change in your position on the settlements?
There's been absolutely no change in our belief that settlement activity and efforts to change facts on the ground undermine the core goal of a two-state solution. That has not changed.
And finally, can you confirm that today an American citizen, teenager, was killed, Mahmoud Mohammed Ali Shahlan in Ramallah by the Israeli army? Could you confirm that?
I cannot, Saeed.
Could you
I'll take the
find out?
question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
I was unaware of that. Please. You wanted to go to Syria, and then I'll.
So, we're now beyond the deadline by which groups were to have told the United States or Russia that whether or not they would comply with the cessation of hostilities. Who has told you that they will comply?
So okay. You're absolutely right. There was, I believe the deadline was noon Damascus time, and we have gone past that. I can say that, as many of you are aware, the full task force, the cessation of hostilities task force, did meet today. I'm pretty sure that meeting is ongoing. And more broadly speaking, the cessation of hostilities is scheduled to take effect at midnight in Damascus, so about 3 hours from now, or 2.5 hours from now, 5 p.m. In Washington. So just to very clearly state what's at stake here, everybody knows this is an important moment. It's an opportunity to put it mildly, for all the parties to step up and to do what they must do to stop the violence and bloodshed in Syria and truly press for an end to this conflict, which has cost so many lives and so much suffering via a political transition in accordance with the Geneva Communique 2012. Now, speaking to your question, which was about
Who
the
said they will
specific,
abide by
right?
the ceasefire, the cessation of hostilities? Who told you, rather?
Right. So let me just see what I have on that. So we do continue to work with the HNC, and we're aware that they have announced that they would participate in the cessation of hostilities. We've also seen the SDF say it would also take part in the cessation of hostilities. I would, without obviously giving a list or naming, going through a list of names, I would just say the vast majority of Syrian armed opposition groups have told the U.S. That they have accepted the terms for the cessation of hostilities. And as I said, many of these groups have made this confirmation either directly to us or through the HNC.
Why not release the names? If they're going to take part
well,
in the
it's
cessation
frankly-
of hostilities, why
sure.
not make
So,
it up and hold them to account if they don't?
Well, due to security considerations that they have, we're not going to list their names. We obviously have the names. We're aware of the groups on the ground, but they, for a number of reasons, don't want their names public.
Are you confident? Yeah, well,
How does that, how do you know if, who's going to judge whether they're in compliance or not then?
Well, the task force that's been set up.
The task force knows the names?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
you're
this
sure
is-
about that?
I'm fairly certain. I'm looking at this right here, and it says that
But
that
no one
they have
outside the-
expressed.
But
the-
no one
sorry.
outside the task
Well, let him
force
finish.
knows that,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, that these groups have made it known to the U.S. or to or via the agency or to us directly, and that there is this list, but we're just not going to publicize it.
I don't understand how this is transparent or how you get any kind of an accountability. I mean, I don't think either of us will. Maybe Arsha wants you to read the full list, but
well, I
here-
would like that actually.
But it would be nice if you could provide one. Or more than nice, it would give the world some confidence that this cessation
Well,
of
look, I mean-
hostilities is actually a real thing and is going to be monitored and enforced.
But it will be. I mean, that's partly
Well,
the role of the
says
task
you.
force. But I mean,
But there's no way to tell from outside if we don't know who's signed on. Anyway, the
Who
HNC,
Who hasn't- well, I mean,
the
obviously,
HNC put out a
Elisa-
statement that said 97 groups had signed it. Is that correct? Your understanding?
I'd have to look and make sure that that's an accurate assessment.
Are you confident that the number of groups, which they did say was 97,
Yeah.
are you confident that the groups, regardless of the number, have indeed conveyed to the agency their intent to participate, or are you making your own checks directly with the groups to ensure that what the agency reports is accurate?
Excuse me. So, again, just to be very clear, so there is this, we do have a good understanding of the various armed opposition groups who have committed themselves to the cessation of hostilities. For a variety of reasons, these groups don't want to necessarily put their names out there publicly or have their names shared more broadly out of concerns, frankly, that the ceasefire, the cessation of hostilities doesn't manifest, doesn't hold. So I think as this thing progresses, the cessation of hostilities, we will have the opportunity, in response to Matt's question, to see these groups self-identify. There will be mechanisms in place that will identify when there are reports of cessation of hostilities being broken by one group or another, and the task force, the cessation of hostilities task force, will look at these violations and adjudicate them.
When you say
So
that,
I guess my point is, sorry, just your direct question was, what do we have confidence?
that the groups that the
Yes,
agency says are going to participate
yes,
will.
to a degree, yes. I mean, I think we are certainly following up as much as we can with the various groups, on a bilateral basis, or however you want to put that, or, directly with the groups to verify. Go
And
ahead.
when you say that one of their concerns is about being publicly identified is the fear that cessation of hostilities doesn't manifest, does that mean that they are afraid that they will be targeted? That they're saying, well, we'll lay down our arms, and that somebody's going to come after
So
them?
my answer to that will be, given the climate that has preceded the run-up to the cessation of hostilities, I think it's understandable that some of these groups would be cautious about putting their names out there in that manner. I think that if it does, and I'm not trying to, I'm not going to be overly optimistic here. I mean, no rose-colored glasses here, and the president spoke very clearly about this yesterday, the challenges that we face in actually implementing this cessation of hostilities. But I think if this thing does find some purchase, if it does get traction, I think then you will see more of a public acknowledgement of what groups are part of this.
So have you, sorry, I got
That's okay,
two
yeah.
more here.
Yeah.
Have you gotten any explicit assurances from the Russian government that they will cease targeting moderate rebel groups?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were finished your question. So that's been part of the last couple of days, frankly, is just really working with the Russians directly, but also as part of this larger task force, which only began meeting today, to work out who those groups are. But absolutely, yes, with the acknowledgement that we won't know until we're past 12:01 in Damascus time, and we see whether this actually bears fruit.
So you don't. So do you believe?
But yes,
their
the Russians
assurances?
have committed themselves. Sorry, just to finish directly answer. Yes, the Russians have committed themselves to not carrying out strikes against groups that we consider part of the moderate opposition.
Why do you believe them?
We've said many, many times that this is, I don't know how to put it any better than saying it's put up or shut up time. It is time for them to show through action rather than words that they are serious about what they profess to be serious about, which is a ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities and a political process that leads to a transition.
Mark, can I follow up on our shot?
Yeah, sure. Get to you.
During the Secretary's testimony on the Hill this week, a number of lawmakers raised concerns about Russia's commitment to this ceasefire. What is the U.S. plan B if there is Russian noncompliance? Is the U.S. considering a track of that would be putting additional sanctions or penalties on Russia, or is the U.S. looking at beefing up its support of the opposition?
It's a fair question, Pam. It's just, I don't want to today talk about any plan Bs or option Bs or however we've heard it bandied about in the media. I think our clear focus right now is, in the days, hours, in fact, ahead of us, trying to get this cessation of hostilities into place, and then what that would entail in terms of a political transition. Ultimately, the price for increased bloodshed, ongoing hostilities, the risk that Russia would bear from those kinds of actions, we've made very clear. There's no long-term solution that involves military force in Syria. but I don't want to conjecture
Is there
about
some
how
kind
we
of
might, what we might turn to if this doesn't work out. I think our focus right now is on getting this
Is there
cessation of
some kind
hostilities
of a
in place.
metric or guidepost in place in terms of how far the U.S. would allow Russia to go with any violation before you did consider action?
So
When would they cross the line?
maybe I could talk a little bit about what I know about the monitoring process and monitoring compliance. The first line of monitoring compliance would be the parties themselves. They would report violations or potential violations to the International Syria Support Group's ceasefire task force, either through one of the co-chairs or through the UN itself. Excuse me. So networks and focal points, I guess, describe it as, are being set up now among all these various actors to be able to exchange information quickly. And we talked a little bit about this on Monday, but this has been fleshed out further. To track when these violations or alleged violations occur and then to respond quickly. And obviously, especially in the early days, these focal points, for lack of a better word, need to be in constant contact with each other. Going to be working out of capitals. There's obviously the group working in Geneva. Get to you a second. And then they'll also be working or coordinated by the UN Office of the Special Envoy. There will be a small in-country presence in Syria, which will serve as a secretariat of the task force. And that will also serve as kind of a conduit or hub of information for everyone. So we've been consulting with the task force members ever since it was established on February 11th. And then, obviously, as we talked about, that particular task force, the cessation of hostilities one, met earlier today in Geneva to confirm the parties' acceptance of the terms for the cessation of hostilities and to review SOPs, how the process would look going forward.
How would you characterize the U.S.'s evolving relationship with YPG?
How would I
With
characterize
TRT World, yeah.
Our evolving relationship?
With YPG,
yeah,
have
sure.
there been modifications? Are they being more cautious? How would you characterize it?
Are they being more cautious?
Is the U.S. being more cautious with its relationship with YPG?
So, okay. Just kind of widening the lens a little bit, that we have supported the YPG as part of a larger group of actors, groups, working mostly in northeastern Syria, really effectively pushing back against Daesh. They've proven to be very capable fighters. Part of really our rethink about how we're combating ISIL in Syria involved providing more support, mostly airstrikes to these groups on the ground, which include the YPG. They've proven to be very effective, among other groups. Obviously, as you know, there have been disagreements between us and Turkey about whether they are in fact affiliated with the PKK, who we recognize as a foreign terrorist organization, designated foreign terrorist organization. We talk about that quite a bit with Turkey. They have different views on it. But we've also been very clear in the past several weeks where we've seen elements of the YPG in and around Aleppo trying to seize territory that we felt was only exacerbating the situation, and we asked them to de-escalate or to stop those actions. The evolution of our relationship with YPG, look, we still view them as an effective fighting force that's taking on Daesh in many respects, in many areas and parts of Syria very effectively, and we continue to support those efforts. But that's always been with the understanding that they're not going to seize territory or hold on to territory, but rather liberate territory that then can be returned to the groups that have been displaced.
And so you're not close to designating it as a terrorist organization?
No. Please go. That's Saeed, then I'll get back to you. I'm sorry, David.
Has that ever been contemplated?
No.
And it probably
No, and it's a long, and it's a very. Sorry, I was just trying to be concise in my answer, but I can get into. It's a long process by which you designate any organization as a foreign terrorist organization. We're not even there with the YPG. We don't consider them to be one.
I want to
Please.
follow up
And
on
I promise,
very
David,
quickly
sorry.
on the 97 groups. You're saying that you are in contact with them somehow, right? Are you saying that you're in contact with all 97 groups?
I can't say that we're working through the HCN and other groups, or HNC rather, and other groups we have direct contact with. I can't say that we specifically have contact with all 97
You at
members.
least have a list of who they are. My question is, do you share this with Russia? Do you tell them these groups are off limit? We don't want you to strike them. That their
So
location.
those are
We
the
don't want
kinds
you-
of coordination, conversations that are taking place within the task force.
Okay, and Millette?
Yes,
Do
it's
you
been,
have the list? Do you have a list?
List of the 97?
I assume there is one. I mean, we have to know who is identified
are
on
you
the
sure?
ground, but I'm not sure, no.
in
I'm just-
answer
I'm
to
not gonna-
Saeed's question, I mean, isn't it blindingly obvious that if there is a list and it's been shared among the ISSG, that the Russians, as the co-chair, would have the list? Is
Well,
that
again,
not-
part of this is, the kind of coordination that needs to take place.
Exactly, so is that not, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out if
Yeah.
this is even a question. Of course, they do, they know.
Yes, I think that information has been shared. And David,
Really, I'm sorry, Dave, just very quickly. Listen, in areas where they actually intersect, I mean, these groups, let's say, they overlap with let's say, like Jabhat al-Nusra, and they continue to strike or die. So what should, let's say, you expressed your intent that you will continue to fight them. There will be no easing of striking Daesh. I mean, the United States did. The president, in fact, did. And the Russians are saying the same thing. So in these areas where there is overlapping or intersection with one another, how would you handle that?
excuse me. Exactly as we've talked about before, which is that, these groups will have every opportunity to separate themselves from the hardline actors on the ground, the al-Nusras, the Daesh, a couple of other groups that we've clearly identified as having no part of any cessation of hostilities. That's part of their responsibility to do on the ground. Now, David.
Actually, that does
Oh.
fall a good moment because it's a
Great, we'll go on soon.
follow-up
I'm
to
just
that.
kidding.
I've noticed a slight
Good
difference
job.
in the language employed by the Russians and by Secretary Kerry this week. The U.S. officials say that obviously Jabhat al-Nusra and Islamic State are not included in this ceasefire. The Russians say the same thing, then they say, and other terrorist groups. Is there a disagreement between you and the Russians as to which groups are going to be involved in this, or was it just a way of phrasing? You yourself have just said, and some other smaller
So
groups.
there, excuse me, those are, and I talked a little bit about this last week.
I was on the beach.
That's okay. And the longer answer is groups that have been identified by the UN as other I think it's one or two other
which
groups.
groups?
I don't have those names in front of me. And we talked a little bit about the fact that, there was this process the Jordanians were leading and made a good, solid effort to coalesce a group of, good and bad groups operating on the ground. But ultimately it was decided that the UN should probably take the lead in that. And frankly, where there was broad agreement, unanimous agreement, is Daesh, al-Nusra cannot be part of it.
Al-Nusra forces
and then
are
two
very
other
close
groups.
geographically in places like Aleppo.
I understand that. And that's what I think Saeed's
Do you think
point
it's
is
going
it's going
to
to,
develop wiggle room in case they end up striking groups on the 97 list who are living next door to Jabhat al-Nusra?
well, I mean, look, I mean, that is, that's the challenge of how we monitor this thing going forward is, and it's a challenge both for the various stakeholders, and that includes Russia. And trust me, we've been very clear with Russia about, the fact that their ongoing strikes are not aimed at either al-Nusra, the vast majority of them are aimed neither at al-Nusra or Daesh. We've been very clear going forward that needs to stop. But also on the ground, it's incumbent on some of these groups to disentangle themselves. I'm realizing that's a challenge. Go ahead, Matt.
Mark, the Russians have produced some maps, or at least one map.
Yeah, I'm aware of them.
Yeah, that show basically Nusra, Daesh, ISIL, and these other terrorist groups as in a fairly large swath, and only small pockets of areas that would be included in the cessation of hostilities. Has the United States or the ISSG signed off on these maps or map?
I cannot confirm that we've signed off on any maps. I just don't have the answer. Please. Are we done with Syria?
Yeah.
Oh, you have a Syria. Great. Go ahead.
No, just, you said that the ISSG was going to have an office in Syria?
Yeah, let me find out. I thought it was the UN is going to have a, well, but the UN,
Where, in Damascus? Is it in like their building that they already have there, I presume?
it may well be. Let me double check on that.
No?
Let me double check this. I want to give you guys the right information.
There's something about a small ceasefire task group office, their secretariat.
That's right. Exactly. That's what I was talking about. That I believe we'll have, but I just want to double check to make sure that's correct. Sorry, guys. Just give me a second here. Apologize, I can't find the darn thing. Monitoring, okay, here we go. So yes, they will also be in touch with the UN Office of the Special Envoy, based in Geneva, and with a small in-country presence in Syria, which will serve as the secretariat of the task force. That's the UN.
Where is that going to be?
Yes, that's right.
But where is that going to be? Is it going to
I
be
don't
at
know.
this
I
base
don't know.
that
I don't
the
know that
Russians have
answer.
set up this
I don't know where in
coordination?
Syria. I don't. I'll try to get that answer. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mark.
Can I ask a question there? If it's in the part of Syria that is still controlled by the Assad government, are you not concerned about the possibility that its activities may be compromised?
I think these, again, not without knowing where it would be, I would hope that we would be looking at all those factors, obviously, and we would be concerned about access. Please.
On the YPG, just
Yeah.
to follow up and make clear, not to beat a dead horse. So
No, it's good.
the
Beat away.
The question about the caution and the changes, Turkey's presidential spokesperson today said that Turkey has seen a change in your relationship with the YPG and that you're being more careful. Do you agree with his sentiment? Has there been a change?
No, I mean, I think if the question is, have we changed our viewpoint or our position or attitude towards the YPG, I would say no. We've always been somewhat clear-eyed about, where they are effective, where they benefit from our support, and where in some areas, and I spoke about Aleppo, where we found some of their actions, and these are different groups, obviously different groups of the YPG that are operating in some of these areas. Some of them are not all that linked up. Part of this complex situation we have on the ground, but we've been very clear when we find their actions to be counterproductive. So, I mean, I wouldn't say there's any shift in our assessment
One more
or
on Syria?
Yeah, go ahead.
Syria, Secretary Kerry brought up the safe zone yesterday. Has this been, and I know he's talking to other countries about ground operations against ISIL.
Right.
This idea I know you're considering, but have you started discussing this with other
No, we haven't. And I think his answer was pretty clear on the safe zone. Ultimately our safe zone is to get a full ceasefire implemented, starting with cessation of hostilities and then a political process on track. But we've talked about some of the difficulties in putting together a safe zone. We just feel like if we can get an actual ceasefire in place, that would obviously be the coin of the realm. Michael?
I have a question similar to the refugee crisis. Greece is being threatened by a temporary, if not de facto, exit from Schengen due to the wall being built on the northern part on former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Does the U.S. have a position, and are you worried that this might lead to more instability for the European unification project? And also, in your opinion, is it fair for Greece, a country who is suffering from the economic crisis and now the refugee crisis?
So, just to be very clear, Michael, your first question is about the wall to prevent refugees from...
Austria and some other countries, they are
Yes.
threatening Greece to throw them out from the Schengen.
So I'd answer it this way. The migration crisis, as we've talked about in Europe, is part of a much larger global crisis. It requires global attention. President Obama has said this. It's a humanitarian crisis that none of us can ignore. And we applaud and thank those countries throughout the Middle East and in Greece's case who have responded to the refugee crisis with generosity, with compassion, and provided these immigrants or migrants rather, and refugees with shelter, safety, and vital aid in times of urgent need. It's been our longstanding process as the EU attempts to grapple with this challenge that all of these migrants should be treated humanely, with dignity, and should have access to asylum screening processes. But I just think that in terms of your second question, which was about Schengen and the border control debate, we think those are really internal questions between Greece and the European Union. I think EU President Donald Tusk, or Tusk rather, has said that expelling Greece from the Schengen area would not solve EU's migrant crisis. Again, recognizing that these are difficult circumstances, and that each nation has a right to control its own territory. But we would just ask that all nations, as Greece has done, continue to show generosity in accepting these and dealing with these migrants.
You said,
Please.
and I quote,
Yeah.
each nation has the sovereign right to control its territory. And in your written question, you told me, including the regulation of individuals seeking entry. Do you mean that it's okay for some European countries to close their borders to the refugees?
What I meant by that comment was that, just as we strive to do in the United States, it's important to have some kind of screening process or some kind of process by which these folks are registered as they come across the border. Please.
Thanks, Mark. On the recent meeting between Secretary Kerry and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, did the United States give any concession to China, such as deployment of THAAD missile in South Korea?
Did we give any concession to China
Yes.
in terms of what, THAAD?
Yes, in terms of sanctions, strong sanctions, Chinese involved with strong sanctions.
Well, I wouldn't obviously talk about the details of our diplomatic exchange with China. We've been very clear that we're continuing consultations with the Republic of South Korea regarding THAAD in response to a series of provocations that North Korea has taken in the past several months. We've made our position on why we're pursuing these consultations very clear to China.
But also Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi wants to have the United States and North Korea sign a peace treaty. What is the U.S. position on it?
We continue to believe, and we spoke about this earlier this week, where the focus needs to be is to get the DPRK to engage on denuclearization. Yes, sir.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done. Nothing to add.
Okay. I just want to go back to Syria for just one
Sure thing.
second. It's just there was supposed to be a Security Council meeting today on Syria about this Russian resolution to basically once again endorse the cessation of hostilities. It's been postponed just now, and I'm just wondering, are you guys okay with this resolution? Because I had gotten some hint that you didn't really think that it was necessary.
We want to see the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2254.
So
That's
you
the
are
one.
opposed to this new one. Is that correct?
I would just say I don't want to say how we're going to vote. We don't talk about those things in advance.
Well, I'm
but
not asking you how you're going to vote. I'm asking you whether you support it.
I would
or
just say
not.
we believe that the focus should be on 2254.
In other words, you're going to veto this resolution?
Quick clarification
He interrupted my questions.
I know.
Tried not to.
I'm
Yeah,
just,
well,
You were done.
she's still talking on it, but you quickly. Would
We're all-
well, I need to continue saying that. That's very important to us.
I'm
too.
sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
Yeah, would the United States be considered on Chinese foreign minister suggested U.S. and North Korea peace talk?
No, I think we want to see the six-party process start again. And again, this is something we addressed the other day, but, we were very clear to North Korea when they came to us to talk about, to engage in direct talks. We want the focus to be on denuclearization and the fact that it has pledged to undertake this, and that's, frankly, we're not going to have other conversations with them without addressing that core issue.
But the U.S. not consider that. I mean, even if it's for their suggestions.
I would not consider
Not
direct negotiations, or
Yes.
no? There's a set process in place, the six-party talks that that's where we would pursue any kind of talks with North Korea.
On China and the foreign minister?
Yeah, sure.
I presume, as it always does, or as you say, it always does, the issue of human rights came up in the meeting with Secretary Kerry.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So today there is a report that this Christian lawyer, Zhang Kai,
Yeah.
who was detained in August, the day before he was supposed to meet with your special envoy, Ambassador Saperstein,
That's right.
that he has confessed to breaking the law
Bless you.
by disturbing social order, and there is an endangering state security, and there's some concern that this was a coerced confession. Do you share that?
We are very concerned about Chinese state media's airing of a purported confession by Zhang Kai prior to any indictment and, frankly, any judicial process whatsoever. Such confessions are counter to the standards of a rule of law society. And you're right that he was detained, as you noted, before he could meet with U.S. Ambassador at Large David Saperstein during his August visit to China. We urge China to release Zhang and others detained for seeking to peacefully uphold the freedom of religion guaranteed in China's constitution.
Do you know if this case was raised by Secretary Kerry? When you met with the Chinese Foreign Minister?
We have raised our concerns multiple times. We'll continue to do so. I can't say with certainty that his specific case was raised in Secretary Kerry's conversations with.
And then
Foreign Minister.
just back on the UN resolution, I presume, since Samantha Power, the ambassador, said yesterday that talked about how good this new North Korea resolution is, that you'll be voting in favor of that, I guess, tomorrow. Is that correct?
I believe.
Or is it still your policy, like with Syria, that you don't talk about how you're going to vote on UN resolutions?
I didn't say we couldn't characterize our views, but we're not going to say how we're going to vote for it. I mean, clearly, as you noted, Ambassador Power put out a very eloquent statement that spoke to the fact that the new Security Council resolution on DPRK is a very good one, very strong one, would break new ground and represent really the strongest set of sanctions imposed by the Security Council.
So you're obviously going to vote no.
In more than 2 decades. I'll just leave my comments for themselves.
She also issued a statement saying, basically denouncing, the arrest of Bahraini opposition leader Brahim Sharif. Do you have any? What else are you doing besides that? She says it's.
You're talking about Ibrahim Sharif?
Yes.
Yeah.
Brahim Sharif.
So we are very disappointed that he was convicted on February 24th to 1 year in prison on charges of incitement to hatred and contempt of the government based on a speech he gave in June 2015 We're following his case very closely. We believe strongly that Mr. Sharif should be released. And we don't believe anyone anywhere should be prosecuted or imprisoned for engaging in peaceful expression or assembly. And we do understand that he can still appeal his sentence. And should he do so, it's important, I think, that the legal process be carried out in a transparent and legitimate manner.
Is it not correct that you guys called for him to be released like more than a week ago?
That's right.
And what does that have? What does this now say about your leverage with your ally and Fifth Fleet host, Bahrain?
We've been very forthright about our concerns about Bahrain's human rights record. At the same time, recognizing that they're an important U.S. partner in the region, as you note. They host the Fifth Fleet. And that relationship is built on common interests, including efforts to fight violent extremism. But that does not exclude a frank and frequent exchange where we have disagreements or concerns on human rights.
Well, it sounds as though because you have these shared interests and they host the Fifth Fleet that they get a pass. You don't really expect them. I mean, you make statements like this, but you don't really expect them to follow through.
Well, without overstating it, we've seen some positive steps taken by the Bahraini government in the past couple of years, but clearly not enough.
Mark, there is a statement now I see from the Secretary General of the United Nations. He calls on all countries to keep their borders open and to act in a spirit of responsibility, sharing and solidarity, including through expanding legal pathways to access asylum. Do you share his concerns?
The last bit I just missed, Michael,
the last
please.
bit is the bit that you like, I think. But the most important thing is that he calls on all countries in Europe to keep their borders open. Because they close the borders, and in Greece there are thousands of refugees. They sleep, in the fields.
Michael, we've talked a lot about this. We're obviously very sympathetic to the incredible burden that Greece has taken on by accepting these migrants. We have said many times that we would like to see Europe, the EU, approach the refugee crisis in a cohesive and comprehensive manner. Because, as you know, right now you've got different countries taking different steps in order to deal with the crisis. We want to see a more comprehensive approach. Please, in the back.
Thank you, sir. A couple of questions. The first is about the conflict between Apple and FBI over unlocking the phone of a terrorist. So, sir, in your opinion, the privacy of a tech company's customer is important, or the security of the whole nation is important?
I'm going to refer to the FBI.
Sir, I have another question.
Sure, go ahead.
So Pakistan and US are going to start their strategic talks from Monday. Secretary Kerry is leading the US delegation. So what will be the agenda of these talks? And secondly, what would be the US new wish list, especially after the F-16 deal?
Especially after the
F-16 deal.
You are correct, sir, that that strategic dialogue will take place on Monday. And we obviously look forward to it. It's very important. I don't have a set agenda in front of me. I mean, obviously, some of the issues won't surprise anyone. It's about strengthening security and stability in the region, about increasing trade, looking at the many different problems and threats in the region, including terrorism, that we've talked a lot about. But as we'll have a better readout to give you on Monday. Yeah, sure, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Yeah.
So the Pakistani Foreign Minister Sartaj Aziz said that a police report has been lodged against the chief of the banned organization Jaish Mohammed for his involvement in Pathankot attack. And Pakistani authorities kept him under protective custody. So such kind of cooperation between India and Pakistan is very rare. How much you appreciate such cooperation, especially like these terrorist type of incidents?
Well, I mean, obviously, we have been very vocal in the past in encouraging greater cooperation between India and Pakistan. I mean, clearly, terrorism is a threat to both countries. And so as they can cooperate on these kinds of issues, we see it as helpful to the region.
Any comment on Iran parliamentary elections?
No. Go ahead. I mean, other than that, it's, we expect. I don't get a pass on that. I'm just.
Not
We hope Iran conducts its election in a manner that not only conforms to international standards of transparency and accountability, but also represents the will of the Iranian people.
And do you think that's possible?
Let's let this thing run its course. Frankly, my understanding before coming out here was that polling stations were kept open. There's been a large turnout, but we won't really have any judgment to make for several days before we.
But just objectively, do you think that it can be, that it's possible for it to be a reflection of the will of the Iranian people, given the fact that the rules and regulations and vetting that has to take place for candidates
I'm not
to be
going to
eligible?
And the exclusion of so many reformist candidates.
Obviously, we believe strongly that all Iranians should have the opportunity to express themselves freely, but I'm not going to prejudge the outcome yet.
Yeah, but you believe that they have they must, but you think that it's an open question that they might or can?
Again, I'm not going to give them a grade either way at this point. Obviously, there's significant challenges within Iran, given the political climate, but I'm not going to say much beyond that.
The extremists saying that Rouhani and Zarif and others are no more than stooges to the West because they signed the Iran deal. I mean, do you have any comment on that?
No.
I just wanted, as a follow-up to
One more.
yesterday's comments from the Secretary about Cuba, do you have any more information about the timeline of his potential trip and whether he would specifically meet with dissidents and other critics of the Cuban government?
No, not at this point, no. Hopefully in the next couple of days we'll have more to say about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I want to get Iran, the IAEA report
Oh, yeah.
that has just come out on this is the first compliance report since implementation day. Do you have anything to say about it?
Well, as you note, they did release their first post-implementation day report. I think it's a quarterly report. The report demonstrates the many steps that Iran is taking to implement the JCPOA and confirms, in our estimation, the IAEA's capacity to monitor adequately the deal's implementation.
Well, it looks as if there's some gray areas about whether or not Iran has been in full compliance with it. Do you have any concerns?
I think you're talking about, if you're talking about the heavy water issue. So there was, and I think it was noted in the report that Iran did briefly exceed its 130 metric ton heavy water stockpile limit by less than 1 ton, I think 0.9. But the IAEA has now verified that Iran has shipped out 20 metric tons, so it's well back with under the limit.
So you don't think that that's an issue?
Again, it was, yes, in that limit is there for a reason, but the IAEA was able to track it, monitor it, and the Iranians were responsive.
Right. So there isn't any
No.
consequence.
No.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys. Happy weekend.